Okay, this is another episode of Reflections, and this one is going to be with a player called Vesslan. And for to give people like a basic baseline for us to start the interview, the problem you have, Vesslan, is that most of the people from your era, so like HeatoN or Element or XeqtR, first and foremost, most of them played longer than you did. Actually, it seemed like you played for a long time because you played like 3 or 4 years. But when CS 1.6 lasted for like 12 years, that suddenly doesn't seem as long. So some of them played, and by the way, played past their prime, and they were sort of a bit washed up and stuff like that. But it meant that more newer fans at least had heard of them a bit more. So we're gonna have to set the base now because people won't realize you were actually like a peer of theirs and you were in teams with these guys and you were like competing against them and beating them and they were beating you. So to start out with, I remember the first time you appeared on the CS scene was like 2001, and it was when you were in this team called MAFIA, and it was a team that, as far as I know, you actually like co-founded with a friend of yours or something.
That's right. No, I think it started in like 2000 or something like that, where we started Mafia, and we did play actually fairly good with a couple of tournaments, and that was actually the team that became SoA Sweden, that we we won one of the early CPLs in Europe at that time.
So okay,
that's right. And I think that was 2000. Or if it was 2001.
2001 was the CPL you won. It was the Amsterdam one in the summer.
Correct.
So okay,
you know better than me then.
So for this team, when you set it up, like originally it was you and then some other people. But as you're mentioning here, you actually went to one of the early CPLs, the European CPL. I think it was actually the second European CPL, and you won it with this team. But it's worth pointing out that you part of how you won that CPL was you sort of managed to steal a few NIP players into the lineup, right? You had like HeatoN, you had MedioN, you had some pretty good players you snuck in the back door because that was when NIP had broken up, So what was the early days of the teams like back then?
Yeah, I think it was, NIP at that time. I mean, they were a construction of a lot of players really early, and I think they kind of disbanded and was formed into two different teams. Basically, I was fortunate to get HeatoN, and his first nickname was Kill for Fun at that time. He was this huge talent that everybody wanted to try to snag. And then MedioN, which is one of the most talented player I actually had a fortune to play with. A small kid, but he was just amazing. And it was kind of those two guys, and then Hib, who actually, so those three guys from NIP came to join me, Trance and Bullet, who was my old Mafia teammates players. And then I remember, if it wasn't Potti, and XeqtR played for a Danish. That's right, the Danish All-Stars team with a couple of talented Danish guys, actually. And we ended up playing each other in the finals of that game. That was a great tournament. There was a lot of really old school and fantastic teams that we played. Apostrophe and Clan Z from Finland, I remember. So that was good times. That was good times.
So, okay, one of the names you just mentioned there is someone who I joked that like people won't know who you are, but and people who are 1.6 players will remember your name. But one name that actually did die out very quickly was MedioN, because if you remember, he actually like officially retired from his prime like right after the 2001 CPL, the big one that they won actually. So he doesn't really have that much of an impact on the game. But I remember there was a point in time where I think it was this time when he was playing in your team where you told me he was like the best player in the world.
He was unreal. I'll tell you. We were obviously practicing. We had the fortune to practice online. That was not so common at that time. And things that I was sitting next to him, and I was like, really? He was so individually skilled, but he was kind of this uncertain kid. He's very, very young, and I think he really didn't like the whole competitive scene so much. I think he enjoyed more the social aspect of playing more than the competitive aspect. So when he was comfortable and we were having fun and just playing around, he was one of the best players I ever seen play the game.
So another name from these early days that I wanted to get your take on was actually the person who, believe it or not, I've always said is my favourite CS player, even though I've watched all these years of CS and I've watched obviously players where the game got to a much higher level later. But the guy early on where his style appealed to me most was Trance, because he was this guy where he was like a super aggressive player, like just spraying everywhere. It was just a really fun style to watch if you're just a fan of the game, okay? And obviously he didn't play very long, right? He just played with you and then he had a brief comeback the next year. What was this guy like? Like, why didn't he told me he always used to get these offers from NIP and get these offers from top, but he always turned them down. What was this guy like? Must have been something unusual, right?
No, he was a fun character, and somebody that I always considered a friend when we were playing. He was also more for the social aspect, but he, from a playing style, I would compare him to maybe all those who are more familiar to that guy, or a teammate that I play with, Notorious. Players that are very good structured players that can adapt into a system. And I mean, those players are normally very underrated because you don't see them go crazy skilled and running all around them. But they're just so good at playing for the team. And those players are normally, I think, some of the backbone players of a team. And I would really compare him to all. And I think Trance had this exactly the same playing style. He was always very solid. You could always count to him. You always knew how he was going to play and react into situations. He played the game just very, very well. And from a personal aspect, a very nice guy, very loyal at that time. I mean, there was no contracts, there was no salaries here and there. So it was really based on personal relationships. And he was a very loyal and trustworthy guy that I really respected, and a fantastic Counter-Strike player.
So one of the weird things is, when I remember back on the old days of this kind of time we're talking about, it really was like two different camps. There was like the MAFIA camp in Sweden, and then there was the NIP camp. There was also like the Nordic Division camp, but at the time they weren't going to their lands initially. So these were like the two rival teams to me, and I always wanted to see like, would vesslan be able to beat the HeatoN and Potti group? And obviously, interestingly, later on, that is kind of how history went. There was the two groups still. Yeah. But there was this period in time, vesslan, where you joined the enemy. You actually joined them to go to the big CPL, and people won't remember this because it's funny, the original NIP lineup is still the most famous one from that era, the one that had XeqtR, because obviously that was kind of like the godlike lineup, where it did seem like no one would ever beat them. But again, this is kind of how things were back then, guys. When there wasn't contracts, people really were just kids, so they had fallings out, and so they literally, like, he left or was kicked from probably the best team ever, right before the biggest tournament ever, and you and all came into this lineup, and you went to this huge CPL, and at the time it was like the World Championship. It was like $50,000 first place. What was this like? Like, why did you join that team? What was the experience like? Because obviously you're only in them for that one event.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually, I was really at taking a decision if I was really going to continue to play already back then, or if I were going to start school. And I was heavily involved in sports still, but I was like, yeah, why not? I mean, I had a tremendous greater respect for them, and we disbanded MAFIA for a time. I felt like I wanted to stop playing for a while. And then HeatoN, I think it was HeatoN and Potti, who talked to me if I wanted to compete in the qualifier with them. And I always had such a tremendous respect for HeatoN and Potti for a single reason, is that they were so super dedicated to everything they were. And I think that I had a little bit of the same mentality where winning was everything for me back then. If it wasn't 2,000% to go and win, I was not interested. And what we had in MAFIA was not that. I mean, it was great and it was fantastic what we had, but it was not that approach or mentality. And to be a part of NIP, that's what I felt like, okay, let's try this. I knew that we were different kind of personalities and so forth, but the share experience of having the same mentality in that team, just full dedication to win, that was just an amazing experience. And of course, at that time, I don't think a lot of people knows this, but I think that the European CPLs were actually more difficult to win and compete in, because it was much a broader Counter-Strike scene in Europe. But it was the kind of build-up to meet the best European team to go over and compete against the best American team, because they never played each other. So that was kind of appealing to me as well, of course. We obviously won the qualifier, and then we went over and had that fantastic tournament in the US, which was such a great experience. And we had a lot of fun there with the NIP team as well. So that was just fantastic experience.
So this is a good point in time to reference the fact that another interesting thing about that tournament is that's the first tournament where the European teams had to play max rounds, because before that, all these European CPLs you're referring to, they were charges only rules. And I actually did like a short video about this recently, but I know your whole career, even when it was max rounds being played for years and years afterwards, because that's just become like the default standard. Like I always say to people now, if they hadn't played the different rule sets, they won't really understand it, because it's like telling a fish about water, you know. They won't understand that they exist in water. So why have you always been such a proponent of charges only? Like, why do you, I mean, I know to this day you still think it'd be good in CS:GO, right?
No, absolutely. I now I'm going to advocate. I mean, I'm getting my feet wet a little bit in the esports scene again, which is really exciting and amazing, with a lot of old people that I know have done for this scene lately, and it's really taking off. It's amazing. But I truly believe that charges only is a format that I think the organizers and the community needs to move back towards. And it's not like I think it's more fun to watch it or play it myself, actually. I think it has a lot of important functions. If we start with, I think, what did it do for the Counter-Strike scene? It actually, I think it developed the scene much more than what MaxRounds did. I think that made a lot of the European teams better than the American teams that was used to playing MaxRounds. And now I'm saying something very bold that I might get heavily flamed for, but I think that the MaxRounds format was one of the core reasons that actually killed the Counter-Strike scene in the end.
Okay, so wait a second. So for anyone who doesn't know, because I didn't state it directly, charges only is basically where you play a set time limit. So both teams play, for example, 20 minutes on T side, and only the T side wins count. So if you win rounds of CT, that doesn't matter. All you're trying to do as CT is just like defend against the other guy winning rounds. Okay, so for people who, max rounds, for anyone who doesn't know, is basically what everyone plays now. You play 15 rounds on both halves in theory, but in reality you don't, because we all know once you get to 16 rounds you've won the game. So that's the basics. So what was bad about that for CS then, max rounds, or what was different from charges only?
So I mean, if we look at MaxRounds, what I'm saying here about why I think it really killed the scene is because regardless of how you twist and turn it, today it's all about map balance. If you win the coin toss or a knife round or whatever it is, and it gets you to play on a certain side of a map, you are guaranteed to play 15 rounds on the easier side of the map. And that's not fair. What happened in the Counter-Strike scene is that you cut down all these other maps to make sure that the maps are so balanced that it shouldn't matter if I start CT or T side. But how fun is it? At the end of the day, you played in 1.6, you played the Train, you played Nuke, you played Dust 2, and you played Inferno. And that's it. And how fun is it to watch the same tactics, the same play on 4 maps over and over and over again? I mean, it kind of kills it, right? So you lose a lot of... the problem today is that you have the same problem. Now Valve have been trying to change the maps to make them more balanced, and you're trying to add more maps into the rotation. But eventually, you're going to have the same situation. When the more of these maps are played, you're going to find out which maps are already too CT or T-sided. I mean, they already took Nuke out of the rotation because what's interesting... We'll talk about the format of the game now and how CSGO compares to 1.6 and why you take Nuke out of the rotation, for example. But, I mean... you lose the dynamic gameplay with max rounds and you have to remove maps, because at the end of the day you're playing 15 rounds as the easier side of one map or not, because the reality is you're not going to play the full 30 rounds. So if you're comparing of charges only, here's why I really advocate for charges only, right? Number one, today one of the core challenges of esports is to make the game more mainstream. And how do you do that? Yes, we implement broadcasting formats, right, to tell the story of how the game is being played or who does something. You add excitements and explanation to how the game and the complexity of the sport looks like. Because face it, if you're a soccer fan and then you go and watch American football, it's a complex game or sport, but you will quite quickly start to understand the format of the competition, right? It's this team against that team. They should score in that end of the field and so forth. So even if it's complicated, you quite quickly get the idea. That's the difficulty and the challenge for esports. How do we create an arena of recognition for mainstream to get involved with? So if you're looking at charges only, this is why I think, first of all, Counter-Strike is going to succeed compared to other esport games when it comes to going mainstream, because it's easier to relate to two people or two teams running around shooting at each other rather than League of Legends and other games. But charges only, the attacking side score points. Makes sense. The attacking team, the one who have the ball, makes a goal. You play halftime, you play 20 minutes on each side. It's easier for scheduling with broadcasting, and it's easier to explain, it's a halftime now after 20 minutes, and you play, now we're switching side, offense against defense. But here's the beautiful side on the gaming or the core esport side. It doesn't matter what map you're playing anymore. You're going to play 20 minutes defense, you're going to play 20 minutes offense. All of a sudden, you can play 100 different types of map, and they can be unbalanced. It really doesn't matter. What a lot of people is going to tell me is like, well, everybody's just going to rush, and now you have really overpowered grenades like the Molotovs and the smoke grenades. It's going to be difficult to rush. But when you really learn to play charges only, and when the format was getting developed, you knew that you can't just only rush. You have to be just more quickly organized, and you have to play smarter. The other backside you had of charges only at the older days was that the CTs was running away hiding from the Ts, and that was just looking stupid. But you don't want to do that anymore, because if the T side plants the bomb, they get more money. So you don't want to let the T sides in and plant the bomb, and you also have really powerful pistols. So if you actually manage to plant the bomb, you can actually win the round. So, and it's just so exciting to follow. I mean, I remember we played this amazing game in that CPL Holland against a Finnish team, Apostrophe. I think they had we gathered like 5 rounds on train as T side only over 20 minutes, and they scored like four rounds over the course of like 5 minutes, and we had to hold them for 15 minutes from scoring another point. And it was just, every single round was just so exciting. I mean, so the format is really, it's more easy to understand for mainstream, and I think that's the challenge, is actually for the gamers itself, the gamers to understand we need to change and adapt to make the game really go big. I mean, I remember when Counter-Strike was developing, like, from 1.6 to source, nobody want to switch over, so the community gets split in half. In the old days, you had the beta versions, right? You had like 4.0, 5.0, 5.2, 5.5. So you had no option. Everybody converted into the new version. Of course, everybody was pissed for every single new version, but if you wanted to keep playing, you had to adapt. And that's what I think is necessary for the gamers to understand, is that you have to adapt for the scene to develop, and not be afraid to try new things that could be good for the scene. Yeah, that was a long monologue, right? But there's a lot more to it, I think, advantages, but I just wanted to give you the high level of it.
So, okay, go back to the same point you were in your career there. Afterwards, the next year, when you left NIP, I remember there was actually a period of time where you were like figuring out, what am I going to do at this point in time? You had all these different options, and one option people actually won't remember, because obviously you went to Nordic Division, and eventually that became the base, obviously with lots of different players, of the teams you would be in for the next few years. So that was kind of your home from then on. But there was actually this brief period where you were thinking of joining Game Online, who was the second best Swedish team at the time, and you went to this, funnily enough, you went to this LAN in Norway called GameSphere, and this was where everyone learned who this fellow called Element was, because you guys lost to this MedioN team, and shockingly in the final. But at the time, it sounded to me when I was talking like you're actually, Game Online was originally the team you were going to join, right? Is that how it was going to go? Did that LAN actually really kind of like mess the deal up?
I actually think no. I actually think that Game Online was a better team at the time. And for me, it was probably more competitive to join that team. It was probably would make that team strong, and we would have a good dynamic in that team. But I just felt like finding the right balance. I mean, they were in Gothenburg, and I felt like I was in Stockholm, and the Nordic Division guys, I really had a great impression of who they were. I always liked Swift, Ralph, and the manager LeBron, and all the players in that team. They had more potential than they were actually performing under. So yeah, it was a decision I took, and I felt like I fitted more in my personality, and I felt like I can bring in a little bit of my experience and my contacts to other players, and maybe we can form around this team, which I think we did a fairly decent job with, and it was I really enjoyed the Nordic Division as well. Really nice guys in that team, and I felt the dedication was there. I think that game online was it was shaky at best. You know, are they gonna be around? Are they gonna be, you know? I wanted stability with people that I felt very comfortable with, I think.
So when you went to the Nordic Division team, though, the reason why I think what you're saying here makes sense is that the game online guys, a bunch of them were like super skilled players, and so they'd had lots of top placings, and it made sense that in future years they'd obviously continue to have top placings. But with the Nordic Division guys, when you started to build this team up and you started to gradually, you know, recruit pieces, like you got some players from Too Easy and you started to get this team together. I remember one of the most shocking moments in your career actually was when you went to the Winter CPL of 2002, which was the one where any top European team that went to these North American CPLs, it was kind of like taken for granted that you'd finished like, you know, maybe top 3, worst case scenario, maybe like top 6. This was the tournament where actually you finished like 9th to 12th or something. Like it went really badly at this one and you were losing to like Riot Squad and stuff. So this must have been a shock for you, right, to kind of drop off that level.
Yeah, it was one of the worst positions I ever had in a tournament, and I think that we tried so many players too much, and we couldn't get I mean, we actually won a tournament before that in, I think it was like CPL Germany, Cologne or something like that, with Nordic Division. We won one of those quite easily, that tournament, against, I think we've played 4 Kings or something in the finals, or SK.
I think it's against All Authority.
Oh yeah, wow! But maybe it was the semifinal, something. We played like 4 Kings. We played those guys. SK formed a new team there
with BDS.
And then
those
it was,
guys,
yeah. And then it was, as you're 100% correct, it was the French team we won against in the final, and we played really well that whole tournament. We didn't lose a single game or a single map, and then we just felt like okay, but we felt. We played other teams and we felt like, well, we're not really there, and we've tried new players back and forth, and then we went over to the US, and I mean, we were not up to par. We were not competitive at that time, and I think that we didn't have kind of the structured baseline that I think a team like a backbone of 3 core players that we can shift the other 2 out maybe, which was a formula that I worked throughout the entire rest of my career with. So yeah, I think it was more of getting the right players into group, which we didn't have. So it was a setback for sure. But I mean, it happens. From time to time, and I mean, looking back, I mean, you learn more from the failures, of course. So another experience, of course.
Because what's interesting is the team you made that was going into the next year, 2003, was the one where it was like the Team 9 Esports United lineup, and you got a lot of the people in who would be like in the team for a while, like Quick, and then you recruited those guys who had been playing in the what team were they on? Which team were Luciano and Lucchesi on? They were on that other Swedish team, right?
Yeah, they were on a Swedish team.
They were on Smurfs team. Let's have a look.
Yeah, they were on some kind of I think they were. I saw them play on a couple of occasions on like some online tournaments, and I was just impressed with their timing of how they played, and they seemed to play really well together.
Oh, they played for Cosa Nostra.
That's right.
So it was the one that Smurfer was on.
And I think we were just playing gathers and scrims and having a good time, and I just remember that they were consistently playing really well. And I don't even remember how we actually recruited them. I know I was with Quick, because me and Quick, we before he joined us with Swift, I was actually talking a lot with Quick online, and I really was impressed with his mentality. I mean, he was kind of a young player at that time. He played
If you
for all
remember,
August.
yeah, he'd been the ones where they'd shockingly beat you guys to go to the WCG, but that team had been kind of considered like a fluke team, and really, I mean, you look at the lineup, like he was probably the only really good player in the lineup. You know, some of the others were just okay.
Yeah, I don't remember. Was Quick already? I think he was actually in my team when we lost to them, if I don't recall incorrectly. But I mean, I remember he was one of the best players in that team. There was a really nice group of guys actually, and but I was impressed with his mentality of how, like, what he wanted to do, and his competitiveness reminded me a lot about Potti and HeatoN. So I mean, he was one of the very young Counter-Strike player, and he developed very, very quickly. He was super dedicated. He was a little bit like, I saw you feature on Google. He was like, yeah, you lock up, I'll stay here and I'll play, you know. And I just love that about him. And we became very good friends. And with that dedication, you go a long way. And that's why I think we started to look at how are we going to form our team based not just on pure skilled or established players. Let's see if we can grind together really, really hard with just really young and dedicated players with the same mentality. And that's how we restructured the team completely, actually. And me and Quick kind of became that backbone with Swift, actually. Even if he was not playing so actively anymore, he was still a important part of how we built our new image, if you would say, to that team. That later became Team 9, which had a lot of success.
Okay, so this is a topic that's one I had in mind to bring up as a theme of your career, which is the reason why this lineup's interesting is because obviously eventually over 2003 you did get this lineup to be one of the best in the world. It was winning tournaments, placing top 3. But what's funny is people won't remember, but back at the time, a lot of the lineups still were based around just getting the 5 best players you could get. And some of it made sense because before some of the changes to CS where you could spray a lot more easily, it was like an individual star game. Like if you had HeatoN and Potti on your team, odds are they would just crush the whole game, you know, and they could almost win the game by themselves. Whereas, yeah, later on, you had to have, like, yeah, good players, but you had to have really good team play, and then obviously tactics were starting to get more developed. Now, an interesting thing about your career is even back in the MAFIA days, you still were really stressing, obviously back in Charges only, so it was slightly different, but you were always stressing, like, tactics should be, like, the most important part of the team. Like, the team has to be able to run, like, complicated tactics, have to have, like, a good playbook of tactics. And so this team here, I feel like the 2003 one was the one where that really, like, got to shine. Because I'll tell you an interesting story, okay? One of the guys who does analysis with me now at events is a guy called Moses, who's a North American player who played in like 2003, 2004. And what's funny is back then when his team got quite good in North America and they were finally able to like beat Team 3D and get like some decent placings at tournaments, he even told me back then they didn't used to watch demos of like SK Sweden, you know, the team that was winning everything and was like almost unbeaten. He said the team they always watched was Team 9 because Team 9 you watched the demos and the idea was you didn't have to, if you watch an SK Sweden game, okay, you would watch like Potti or HeatoN kill everyone and you'd be like, right, well I can't copy that because I'm not Potti or HeatoN. But if you watch a Team 9 demo, you'd see a tactic and you'd go, right, well I can do this tactic actually. Like the flash makes sense here, and if this guy follows up here, we'll be able to attack in this way. So was this just always your philosophy, or was there like a specific reason as to why you wanted to go this approach over just having superstars and trying to win off skill?
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, playing in NIP, it was just everybody was skilled. I mean, it's not only Potti and HeatoN. Everybody was really skilled players. Everybody was good in their individual aspect. The reason I think they even brought me in was I was fairly good with the AWP quite early. But I think that what really, and I mean, skilled players is not only people that can shoot people, right? I think that the best players in the world have a knack for timing, right? It's like in sports, you can see what's going to happen before it happens, you know? So that makes the best players, period. It's the way they just know, they just have a feeling what's going to happen before it happens. And that NIP players were so skilled. They were so good at adapting to each other. Good team play. I mean, I think people don't understand how good of a team player HeatoN was. You know, the best communicator in any team, motivator in that sense. Potti was just a fierce competitor. All, as I told you, I think All is maybe the most underrated Counter-Strike player of all time. You know, the importance. You look at that guy during tournaments, and he just gets entry frags all of the time. So my philosophy was like, okay, hey, we're not gonna beat this team because that was our nemesis, right? We can't beat these teams on skill again, and that's just not gonna happen. They have the most skilled players. So we had to adapt, and I think that I always had enjoyed from my early Counter-Strike career, even before MAFIA, to be interested in building tactics. And I liked American football and the approach of how you play the game. And I think Counter-Strike is very similar. You have an offense, you have a defense. Defending side, you have to adapt to the offensive side and rotate and play for each other. Whereas attacking side, you have kind of a set strategy of that you're going to execute. And I think that's what we really worked really hard on, is how can we minimize mistakes, take good angles, make sure that we are consistent on every single round that we play. Of course, you need to be clutch and win important rounds, but minimize mistakes and be consistent every single round of the play, because then you're maximizing your output, right? And we worked really hard with that. And I think in Team 9, what we developed a philosophy of more of that American football play, where we said, okay, let's try to see how they play, and we adjust to that. And we made rotation schemes, and we talked, we set people together, okay, you guys working like this and that. So we developed a lot of time, and we were fortunate to become an early full-time professional team, living together and playing together. And we talked a lot of Counter-Strike, right? We talked a lot of strategy and so forth. And I think that's what a lot of people don't know, is maybe that when XeqtR, we recruited XeqtR, we actually had the opportunity to recruit Element. But we felt like he was not going to be in the style of play that we wanted to have. So we discarded talent in order for team play. And we did the right choice. XeqtR, it was not the same player as Element, but he fitted our style of play perfectly. And we, together with him, we developed the money strategies on how to manipulate the money system, which we were, I think, the first team to really do. And I think that was a major reason maybe why we had a lot of success that year, 2003. We won a lot of tournaments. And I think we won like the Click Arena, we won ESWC, Swedish Esports League. And I think we finished like second on CPL in the US, yep, and third or fourth in the winter one. So I mean, it was a very good year for us, and we didn't play up to our ability 100%. We had a little problem because of players that was changed out, unfortunately. But the philosophy of how we played as a team, I really think that's something that maybe CSGO is lacking today. It's a different game, obviously, but I think there's a lot more of tactics and team play that could be utilized today. That's missing.
Okay, so what do you mean by that? Like, what core qualities do you think was in this? Like, because this is obviously like your best team in terms of like a mix of skill and tactics and results. So what do you see missing from CS:GO in that sense?
I watched a lot of games lately to really understand how they play, and I think that, I mean, obviously players are extremely skilled, but the problem is that it's not that they rely on skill. It's a consequence of how the game is constructed. It's actually easier, I think, to hit targets now because of the source code or the hitboxes are a little bit different. So and I feel it's easier to kill people. But the problem is, so people are really, it's kind of a set and go function now. People try to use grenades to get into a position and then try to pick out people, and with skill. So they're facing skill with skill, but they kind of lose a little bit, I think, of the concept of the how should I say, the philosophical concept of how to approach the maps. Every single map have their strengths, and most of them is in the middle point of the maps, because that's going to define of how you rotate and provide backup on the CT side, and it also defines on how you can move from one bomb site to the other, attacking them as T side. And today you see that T sides, they kind of spread out. It's like, okay, two guys go that way, two guys go that way, let's try to see if we can pick one guy off here. The CTs, they try to use Molotovs and smokes to get into position, and it's a very static gameplay in that sense. I would have seen, how we played, one of our core philosophies of our strategies was to take control of certain areas of a map. Let's say, if you look at DreamHack, one of the latest tournaments, right? And you see the NIP game against TSM on Dust 2, perfect example. Why did NIP, they used steamroll them, right? Because they were in control of the center part of the map on Dust 2. Like, they were in control of the stairs and in the center. If you're in control of the stair and the center, it makes it very, very difficult for the CT side to know what side they're going to attack. And when they are being confronted with what bomb spot it is, the rotation is going to come in too late. So that's what I mean. It's like, I think that people are playing too statical today. It's a consequence of how the game is, of course. So people rely on their skill and the AW, the power of the AWPer. Everybody have a good AWPer. So you're trying to get entry frags, and then you're trying to define how they're going to attack. But I would like to see more of an idea that, okay, let's try to get a control of this portion of the map, and then we have a strategy based on that. Because remember now, you have so little round time to play with. And that makes it, I think it's even stupid to play so statical as they play today, because you're going to be very predictable. Of course, you have the help with that the maps are more T-sided and that the smoke grenades and the flashbangs and so on are very powerful. But so you can commit to a bomb spot and it's going to work because you have good skilled players and you can use grenades in certain ways. But to get more dynamics, I think that there should be a plan, that is based on, okay, we do this. If they react like that, let's do like this, because that's going to give you more time to maybe make fakes and make it even more difficult for the defending side. That's my 5 cents on it right now.
Okay, so a question I have about the 2003 era, when you had all this success and you did win big championships, one of the problems is, if you remember the order of how things went, the 2 tournaments you won was where other teams kind of did you a favor. They beat the HeatoN and Potti SK lineups, like Eolithic beat them, and then it was actually it was X lineup that had that crazy upset at ESWC that got them into the final. And so even though you won these championships, HeatoN and Potti could always be like, yeah, well, we would have beat them if we played them. And then later in the year, they had their really crazy run where they like won all the tournaments, and they were nearly unbeatable. Your whole career, except for that one CPL, you were always trying to battle against whatever teams HeatoN and Potti were on, basically. And I used to think back at the time, like, you were crazy, basically, because I know you actually deep down believed you could actually beat these guys. Whereas I have to say, like, I mean, they did beat you a lot most of the time, and most of the time they did have the better teams. And so I used to think, like, okay, that's cool that you believe that, but I think you might be crazy. I remember one story, okay, that I've got to remind you of, because it'll sound like a totally fucked up story to tell someone because it's so horrible, but this is just to show your mentality, right? So do you remember at CPL Cannes, I know for sure you remember this, in the final, you were playing a nuke. Now, what everyone else remembers about this game is it was the worst game of your career because you individually went 0-12 on T side and your team got wrecked because they just held on CT side. So, but here's the mad part about it. Before the game where you went 0-12, you said, I remember a teammate of yours telling me this, you said some epic speech where you told your team, like, listen, like, like, we're going to play together and like, fuck this, we're going to make history. You said some epic line like that, it was like a movie scene, If you'd have won the game, it would have been the best story ever, right? Because like you would have seemed like the ultimate leader. But then obviously in the game, it went really badly. Was this really your mentality? Did you actually believe that you were going to beat HeatoN and Potti and you were going, like your teams were going to show they had the better philosophy? And even if they had like amazing players, somehow you would beat them out?
I mean, I remember that game. I mean, I think that I think one of the the problem was that a lot of team members of mine didn't think that we could beat them, And if you're the team leader and you can't motivate your teammates, what team leader are you, right? You have to, you have to really believe that you can win, otherwise you won't win. That's ridiculous. And I think that's, a perfect example was when I came down and met these, and I helped this MiBR guy and I coached them after my career. That was the biggest problem. It was not their skill or team play or whatever. It was just they didn't believe that they could go up against these legends in Counter-Strike and win a game. And I was like, seriously, guys? You have to die trying, right? So, I think that was more about trying to motivate my teammates and just trying to understand that, hey, if we're in the finals in a CPL, I think we can win the game as well. Of course, it was difficult to beat that team. We were not good enough to win against those guys, and Nuke was our worst map for sure. So of course the guys were not like, okay, nukes in the final, that's great. And then I'm like, you fucking kidding me? Excuse my language here, right? I was going mad, like, because I mean, you just make it happen. You have to believe in yourself that you can beat somebody else, regardless. I mean, you know how it is in Counter-Strike. I mean, sometimes you have the momentum on your side, and that's what you need, and that's enough. So, and I mean, if you're comparing to what we against SK or NIP and Potti and the HeatoN guys, and I think that Eolithic, they beat SK like 6 out of 7 times they played against each other. We never lost against Eolithic. So we were equally good at those guys or better. We won tournaments and they won some tournaments. So ESWC, they could have won the tournament. We won the tournament. Click Arena, they had a chance to win the tournament. We won it. We won against Eolithic twice then, both in the playoffs or in the group stages. I think it was on Kabul or something, and then we won in the finals. So it was, you know, I think we were definitely equally good as these guys at that time, not in the CPL Can scenario.
Sure, yeah.
You know, and 0 to 12. I mean, honestly, I think most good players have had a bad game, of course, and I think I even had minus in the beginning of that game.
Okay.
I think I had some team kills or something beautiful like that. But it was really, I think it was, you know, you have to, as a team leader, make sure that your team believes in it, and if you have that mentality, then you can win. So I think mentality, as I said, that's why I like players like Quick or XeqtR, who became a friend of mine and still a friend of mine. That's something that I really respect and I want with teammates. And one player also very underrated was Luciano in our team. He didn't believe he was good, and you know, sometimes I didn't believe it, but hell, you know, every single tournament he showed up to play, you know, and he always delivered. He was always consistent. He was a great teammate, a great player, but mentality is so important, especially in Counter-Strike. You have to go out there. I'm gonna go around this corner. I'm gonna headshot this guy. There's no question about it. Bam. But I mean, when you're like younger players and they're gonna go up and play against their legends like the MiBR guys, they're like, yeah, it's cool. I'm gonna play these guys. They're like, wow, the guys are changing name on the warm up, you know, and they're like, whoa, look, I'm playing Potti in the finals here. Yeah, what kind of mentality is that?
So along these lines, there's another epic quote that I remember, because it's just like I associate it with you, and it's actually something that in the Swedish scene was quite famous, which was, again, you had another line where I think it was after you won the ESWC, Click Arena, so like in theory on paper your team could have been like up there with SK as one of the best, and you were trying to like motivate your team, and you told your team, I mean, obviously I have terrible Swedish, but it was along the lines of like "Vi är bäst i världen," however you say we're the best in the world in Swedish. That's what you basically told them. Okay, so what my question is, obviously when you look back at history, obviously HeatoN and Potti have more titles and they have all the incredible victory that like almost no one can match, you know. Is it at all like a problem for you when you think back on your career that you never did manage to like become the ultimate team? Like you could never be like the dominant team that won all the tournaments and stuff. Like, were you someone where, like you were saying before, like winning is everything? Was it? What was it like? Here's the way to say it. I used to say to some of the North American teams who were good, and sometimes they might have a CPL where they finished third or they had like a big upset win. I would always say to them, I never understand how you guys are like happy with that. Like you have the big result and the big win, and at the end you go, okay, we didn't win, but you know, who cares? We tried our best. I said, look at Potti, this one tournament. I remember CPL Winter 2002, where his team finished third. And you have to realize third's pretty good for most people, but because Potti had won every tournament, the look on his face was like someone just shot his dog. Like if you were going to be the champion, that was kind of the mentality. So what was it like for you if you were always there, you were always in contention, but you weren't always the best? What was that like in your career?
No, I mean, as I said, I mean, we won tournaments, we lost tournaments, and of course, I wanted to win tournaments. At that time, looking back at it, I was super pissed if I didn't win a tournament. I was super, super pissed off, and I was nasty. I was such a bad loser. I think I was blaming everything and everybody.
Okay.
But, you know, for sure. Like, I totally wanted to win. A little bit too much, I think. But now looking back at it, of course, I'm like, well, you know, we had a pretty good run. I won a couple of I think we won like 4 or 5 CPLs with my teams. We won ESWC. The worst finish I ever had in a tournament was a top 10. Is that bad? I don't know, of course. I'm proud of that, and I really had a great time, and I think I also take a lot of pride that my team, was a group of really nice guys. We had the fortune to have great sponsorships that supported us, because we were representable, and we were not the skilled teams that everybody was expecting to win, but we did sometimes anyway, and I take pride in that, and I think that was something that I, now looking back at, it was okay. It was a pretty decent career anyway, right?
So a guy you referred to already, XeqtR, also someone who played early on with the guys in NIP and SK, but what's funny is later on in his career, he was obviously in Neolithic and he was in your team, and he was a guy where he also seemed super motivated to, like, I want to beat HeatoN and Potti, obviously because he used to play with them, and so he wanted to kind of show like who's best or whatever.
And he did, of course, in Neolithic a lot.
Sure, so. Yeah. So what was he actually like as a person, though? Because I remember, here's the thing of vesslan. Everyone in the modern day thinks of XeqtR as like, just an okay player, but who was like a tactical thinker, because that's how he was in the latter days. Okay, after your teams, we went to NOA, he was the in-game leader, okay. But what's funny is I remember he used to be like a HeatoN and Potti, like individual player in the early days, and actually he wasn't really a tactical thinker, and it felt like it was kind of like the time he was coming to your teams that he was developing into this. Is this accurate?
So I would have to say that XeqtR is by far the most intelligent Counter-Strike player I ever played with. He really thinks about every single aspect of the game, and when I said before that the best players have, they can see what's happening before it happened, I think XeqtR was one of those players. So I would put him up there as a top 10 player for sure, because his timing was ridiculous. His just that feeling to be in the right place at the right time. And he single-handedly developed strategies and ideas of how to play the game that he was unique and a pioneer in Counter-Strike in that sense. Fantastic guy. So the highest and utmost respect for him. And I think that both Potti and HeatoN would agree with me that, XeqtR, he added a lot to a team. And individually as well. Because you have to remember that some players, they are very good at adapting, as I said. If they need to carry a team with their skill, they carry their team with skill. If they need to have a supporting role, or so then they take a supporting role. So, and I think he was that kind of player. In some teams he was that skilled mad player that everybody, wow, he was so skilled. But then when he came back and played as a team leader for NOA after playing with me, he was more of the supporting player and took that role. So it was just a different type of player. And I think I had the same thing, in Nordic Division I had more of a skilled approach, whereas later I had more of a team player approach. So it's just same thing in NIP, right? So Hyb is a great example, if people remember him in NIP. He was always a support player, but he added a lot of dynamics into a team, actually.
So, okay, if you're going to bring up Hyb, that's a great timing for me to ask about vesslan the AWPer. Because one of the original things you were known for is you were one of the few dedicated AWPers, and actually Hyb was one of the other few ones. And what people don't remember is, for the first maybe 3 or 4 years of CS 1.6, it wasn't 1.6 back then, but I'll say that for the sake of that's what we call the game, okay? So for the original Counter-Strike, a lot of players, could use the AWP online, or they could use it for fun matches, but actually at big CPLs, big pressure matches, even some people who were AWPers, only used it sometimes, or they would just you could tell maybe they got nervous. And I remember K-Sharp in some CPLs didn't use the AWP, even though he was an amazing AWPer, So back then it felt like you had to have a very set mentality to be the AWPer. What were your qualities as an AWPer? What was the way to use the AWP in your philosophy?
Consistency. One shot, one kill. That's the weapon. And I'm actually, surprised when I see a little bit of the CSGO players today. They take so tight angles that there's no way. And I see them miss shots because they're used playing on so small margins. The AWP is about making that shot and getting that entry frag or that kill. And I think I always apply that mentality. If you do it right, you minimize your mistakes and take strong angles where you have an advantage, especially on CT side, then it's really powerful weapon, right? And you can single-handedly get 1-2 shots, and that's enough probably to win the round. If you hit 2 shots, it's like a 5-on-3, right? So, but there's a lot of philosophy, I think, that's goes to waste in AWPing today that I miss. I'm quite surprised that you don't see more rotation on an AWP on the CT side. You know, I would like to see that you use spawn tactics on CT side so the AWP shows up on different spots of the map, because that makes it very confusing on the T side. Hey, wow, the guy was in Ivy Alley on train with the AWP, let's go inside towards B, and then all of a sudden he's playing inside B with the AWP.
So for someone who doesn't know, by the way, what spawn tactic, you mean like if you get a really close spawn to a different spot, maybe you'll go to that spot instead this time because you have the shortest path.
Exactly. I mean, today you use grenades to get into position, to hold your position. Of course, people use spawn tactics today as well, but not in the same extent. And I think that the grenades are so powerful that you can really leverage those to get into the position that you want to anyway. But you know, I think AWPing is a very important part of the game. I think it's even more important now than it was before. So, I mean, I think they can be more creative of how it's being utilized. But I mean, obviously, the skill level of the players is amazing. So it's really exciting to watch them, the best players today.
How good do you actually think you were as an AWPer? Like, I mean, I'll just give you a story that you won't know. You won't remember this, okay? Just a funny story. So because we're talking, like, when you first were AWPing was like 2001. It was really early in the game, okay? So at the time, even the esports side of Counter-Strike was quite small. Like, for a start off, in 2001, there wasn't HLTV. There actually wasn't a way originally to watch the games for these European CPLs. So people could only watch demos. And so actually the scene of people watching the esports side was still pretty small. You know, it hadn't gotten as big as it would later. So as a result, since I was a journalist and I had access to pro players, sometimes I would ask people stuff just for my own benefit. Like I remember asking you, how do you do a no-scope with the AWP? Because at the time, it wasn't a well-known technique. You know, you had to like stand perfectly still and you had to like fire just before the scope came out, and it was a little bit. There was a technique to it, okay, that everyone will know now because it's quite a famous technique, okay. But at the time, unless you were a pro player, lots of people didn't know it. So I asked it just so that I could then go and play really low-level public servers and just wreck everyone, and everyone thought I was cheating, you know, because I could like fire without the scope and stuff. So purely that's the reason I went to know. But at the time, I thought you were like a really good AWPer. Did you actually think of yourself that way?
I think I started just before. After Nordic Division, and I think when I was even in NIP, I started with a lot of AWPing. I was kind of utilizing. I was utilizing a Razer boom slang, you know, and everybody thought I was crazy.
Oh, ball mouse, yeah.
Exactly, and it had such a high DPI. So, I mean, it was working very very well for the AWPing. And I liked that I had actually a thumb button. At that time, I think Boomslang was the only one that had it before the Explorer came. It was just around the same time as they came out, the optical ones. And that gave me the opportunity, you know, to switch very quickly, because I was using my secondary weapon on the thumb and my primary on so I could switch very quickly, so I could shoot very quickly between my shots, and people didn't do that. At that time, you shot and you waited until the scope came back. But at that time, if you switched your weapon, the scoop actually came up quicker, so you could take your secondary shot more fast. So essentially what made me a little bit unique at that time was I could take more shots in the same time frame as others. So I was actually utilizing the AWPing a lot more than most people did. So I would hopefully put myself up there a little bit as a good AWPer, for sure.
Because an interesting question I have for you is, one period people won't remember is after you like officially like step back from playing in Adrenaline, you were initially just going to be like a coach or something, but then the team itself split apart not that long afterwards, and like, you know, XeqtR went to NOA and different players retired, etc. But there was a period, it wasn't very long, where you were announced that you were going to go to Brazil and you were going to in some way be involved with MiBR. And so if we're going to talk about AWPing, you were there during the same time that Kogu was there. For me,
yes,
I still think Kogu's like the god of AWPers, you know, because his skill set was amazing. So what was it actually like to work with this guy and to work with MiBR? Like what was he actually like as a player? Because you got him quite young in his career.
Well, you know, it's great. I'm glad you brought that up, because actually one of the periods you asked me, like looking back at my career, I think that one of my proudest moment of my Counter-Strike career was actually that experience. Because what a lot of people don't know is that the father of one of the players in that team, his name was Rafael Veloso. his father, Paolo Veloso, has maybe one of the most underrated personalities, what he have done for the gaming community today. Not only did he sponsor an esport team to become professionally and what that brought to the scene for the whole South American region, but he also actually invested in a company to me. So that was kind of a deal where he said, hey, John, can you come down and help my team to become better? And at the same time, I invest in your business venture. And this business venture was the VBcast, which was kind of the first broadcasting format for esports in the West world outside of Korea.
It was a streaming platform.
It was a production company doing broadcasting formats like we enjoy today in esports, and it was also a streaming platform for esports. This is back in 2000, end of 2003, early 2004, and that we did. Outside of Korea, I think we were the first one to really do that and pursue that. And he also actually funded CPL tournaments and in South America and things like that. So. But going back to your question, I think that it was also from a personal perspective. I always enjoyed coaching in sports, in real sports, and it was great to do it in Counter-Strike because I saw a lot of potential with the MiBR team. We obviously played them several times and was just like, whoa, these guys are so skilled, but they kind of choked in tournaments and they didn't have a strategic philosophy of how to play and how to approach the game. So I was fortunate to work with those guys, and Kugu, who I think I became very good friends with, and I think he listened a lot to me. We worked, instead of just working on their individual plays or as a team, which we obviously tried to refine their tactics and their approach a little bit, we worked a lot on a lot of other aspects of becoming a professional player and getting a different mindset. I was testing them with a lot of things that they might think was stupid, but I think they started to understand the underlying, psychology of what it takes to become professional and push yourself and achieve things that you didn't think you could achieve. Because if you can change that in different things in life, it builds confidence, and that translates into the game and your competitiveness. So we did a lot of those things, and with Kugu specifically, I think I refined. Hopefully I gave him some tips. You would have to ask him if he learned something from me, but I would like to think so. I think we actually did work on consistency instead of just being mad skill. Just utilize that skill and channelize it to make sure that you take a kill, move on, rotate, take a new kill, and just be solid, because you just need a shot. You don't need to jump in with an AWP and take 5 shots, bam, 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 bam. You need 1 or 2, and that could be enough.
Okay. So you were someone where the time period when you retired from CS, even though it's true, you were trying to get I think it was Sniden who you recruited as your replacement or whatever into the Adrenaline team. It's true, there were a lot of skilled players, and if you were initially going to be a coach or a manager, it was at the time you had one of the best sponsorships, one of the best salaries. So I can understand why this would make sense in terms of doing the business stuff. But there was a lot more years of CS, and there's a lot more years where some of these players all competed, etc. Was it the right move to retire then? Could you have done a couple more years if you'd really wanted to?
Yeah, I think so. At that time, I was just excited about the business opportunity to build business applications or ventures around the gaming scene. And I enjoyed that. I think maybe we opened the door to a few of the other ones that came after us. I had a great experience. I was in South Korea working with CJ and the World Esport Games, and that was a great experience. So, obviously I learned a lot from that, and then I got into the whole business scene of streaming media technologies, which I've been working for a long time. But I think that, of course, probably I'm a competitive guy. I can sit and play a few minutes of Counter-Strike now, and, I can still do this, But I just like sports and being competitive. So I think everybody that's played on this level or a very high level, you have to have something of that inside of you, and it wants you to coming back for more,
So you kind of referenced it here, but there's a few different business things I want to talk about now. So one is one that in theory you weren't involved as, you were just involved as a player, but it's quite a unique concept, which was in 2003, they began the Swedish Esports League, the CEL, which was, the concept of it was a league and it was only Swedish teams, but the idea was, because obviously everyone can't just come and play every week in Stockholm, that would be ridiculous when you consider, like for people who don't know this, yeah, Sweden only has a few million people, but it's a massive country, like it's really long, and if you go from like Malmo to Umeå or something, you're going to be traveling forever, mate. You could be on that train for like 8 hours or something. So it's a really big country. So the concept that was genius around it was everyone played in the league, but to make it not just an online competition where people could be like, that guy's cheating or who cares, you know, it's online. Everyone did play online, but with the really good Swedish internet, they were doing it from internet cafes. So the idea was every team had an internet cafe they played from. So SK played from one, Highland Online played from Highland Online. You know, a lot of the teams were actually named after the cafe because that's why they got teams. But this was a very interesting, unique concept. Unfortunately, in terms of as an actual business, it only lasted, even though it lasted like 2 years, it was getting quite ropey towards the end in terms of how it was held. And I mean, I don't know what you think about this guy, but I'll just say personally, one of the guys who was behind it, that guy David Garpenstall, like a lot of businesses died that he was involved with. So I'm not entirely sure how good he was in terms of managing the business. But as a concept, tell me about the concept, because I know you were always like a big proponent of it, right?
Yeah, I was actually. I thought they did a great job. I think that the concept was ahead of its time, and you know, it was a great combination of a LAN/online, right? Because you had referees at the internet cafes to make sure that everything was correct. It was an opportunity for fans to come and see the players to play professionally, and I think it was a beautiful format. I was really impressed with what they did, for sure. And I think I don't even remember why it faded out. I know that they had a lot of opportunities to expand the league internationally, but again, you know, sometimes being the first is not always the best with a concept. But a lot more potential to it than what actually happened. I think they were a little bit too focused on this kind of player licensing and trying to structure it and being too biased. I think that's a challenge also moving forward for the esports scene, is how the scene can get organized. I mean, a lot of people have tried and failed because they're non-biased. Like either it's an esport organization over here, or there's no incentive or no reason for teams or players to organize themselves. So that's kind of that's a challenge. It's a childhood problem of the industry. It's grown up so quickly if you compare to traditional sports. So I think that will settle down by time. But there's still a lot of different things to be done in the esports scene. And I think there's definitely things you can look at the past, what's been successful or not. And I think Swedish Esport League was ahead of their time with a really great concept. I think they did a lot of nice things. You know, they had statistics on the players, and they were this LAN online concept, and there was a lot of great ideas. They actually, I think they built this so-gamed platform, and they had this in-game platform that was similar, I think, to what's done with the ESCA today and stuff like that. So.
Okay. So another company, as you referred to already, was when you were doing the VBcast stuff, which was famously the Octashape plugin. And at the time, people have to realize streaming did not exist. Everyone who watched games, if I watched a CPL, I watched it through HLTV. I went inside the game and I put the IP in and I joined the server and I watched, like, I controlled the camera. I went, I mean, for some of those, maybe not so much, but in theory, there was no streaming software. Now, this is one of the first ones, and interestingly, the whole reason it got introduced is because these WEG tournaments, the World Esports Games, which were originally in Korea, the idea was they didn't allow HLTV. In fact, they didn't even release demos until after the tournament had ended, so you could only watch it through streaming. And obviously, initially, everyone had much worse internet connections, and it wasn't as crisp as it is now, where it would work flawlessly. So again, this is another thing where, in theory, you were there like on the ground floor, right? You were like one of the first people to be involved with the streaming stuff. So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of the idea that I had with the whole streaming. Now I'm gonna do a little shoot out to MTG. I think that was funny. You know, before we started streaming with the production company we did, I actually made production formats and I was up to pitch it to MTG. And, you know, they said like, Johan, this is interesting, but people are shooting at each other. I don't think we ever put this on TV. I think that's funny now when they've obviously been aggressive and get involved with ESL and DreamHack. Congratulations, really fantastic. So that's awesome to see that. But I think it's a funny story. I think that so when they kind of declined me on saying that, this is not what we think is on TV, I said, maybe they're right, because the gamers are online. The problem, I thought, was that the HLTV product was too complicated to get involved with. So I wanted to kind of make it a one-click play functionality, what we are seeing today with Twitch and so on. So that was kind of the whole idea of it, to make it accessible, add some excitement with the broadcasters. The problem, as you say, is that at that time the connectivity was not good enough to make a quality enough product for people to see. But we learned a lot from it. It was really, really fun, and the whole team that I worked with was amazing, and it was a great experience. And I think that we did something quite pioneering at that time.
So I know after your career, you had lots of opportunities to go different places, and one of them that you referred to was going to South Korea and getting to live there for a while. And actually, someone I know also who went there, an ex-teammate of yours, was XeqtR, because the thing is, I mean, there's a crazy whole side story that I'll explain really quickly, but basically, he actually is originally Korean, but he grew up in Norway, and he was orphaned, right. And it wasn't technically an orphan, he was given up for adoption as a young child, and there was this crazy story where, I think it was in 2010 or something, where he actually didn't know who his birth mother was, but because of one of the events set up by the guy who made WEG, actually, called Kanyang, when he did this event, E-Stars, they invited XeqtR one year to be a commentator, and so there was a newspaper article here's the commentators, and his mother saw the newspaper article and was like, wait a minute, that's my son. And so he actually got to meet his mother, and so as a result, he kept coming back to Korea. Every few months he'd come to Korea, then he'd go back to Norway, and he'd come back. Now, I know you were meeting up with him at the time. Do you have is there a good XeqtR story? Is there any interesting stuff you can tell us about? He's an unusual guy, right? I mean, you once had a great line, by the way. You might have forgotten this. You once had a great line about XeqtR where you said, all XeqtR knows is playing CS, whining, and then I think that was it. I think you didn't even say girls. You just said that. That's all he knows in life. He doesn't know anything else about life.
Dude, that guy, I mean, I was shocked when he was in our team. If he wasn't playing Counter-Strike, he was playing on his mobile or something. He was I think he was more Korean than he actually realized that he was. Genes, I mean, one thing is how you're being raised, obviously, but he was super Korean already when he was young without ever been to Korea. So he was just really anxiety problems, ADHD kind of guy, wanted to do 2 million things at the same time. Have you seen this guy play this old game on what is called MS Ray? What's it in English? Minesweep, something like that.
Minecraft?
It's this old game where you're gonna put flags next to a bomb.
Yeah, Minesweeper. You have to try and not get blown up. Yeah, it's a really old game on Windows, right?
Dude, watch XeqtR play Minesweep. It's I think he has a world record in Minesweep or something. The guy, and in Snake on mobile, is just ridiculous. And I remember we were in Korea. We were hanging out, playing poker. Doing drinks and whatever, and one night we were out drinking, and he actually got robbed. But the funny story was that he looks very Korean, and I left for home, and I was with my girlfriend, and she was like, you should come home early, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll come home early. And then he calls me, and he's like, dude, you have to come and bail me out, I'm in prison. And I'm like, yeah, that's a funny story, dude, it's 6 a.m, I'm going to bed here. It's no, I'm in prison. You gotta come and get me out. This crazy guy, and he screams, and he's all pissed off, right? And I was like, really? He's like, yes. Here's the address. I have one phone call. Come here right now. And I was like, okay. So I went there, and what happened was actually, true story, he was in prison, and I had to come there with my moderate Korean to try to get him out of jail. And what had happened was that he actually got robbed. And he was so upset, so he had called the police, and the police came there. He obviously looks very Korean and doesn't speak a word of Korean, and they think he's fucking with them, right? So they think, oh, the guy's drunk, let's just bring him in and let him sleep the booze off, right? But he was all furious. He's been robbed of money, and they put him in jail, and it was just a funny story. And I remember my girlfriend was like, where are you going? And I was like, I'm going to help my friend out of jail. And she's like, yeah, right. But yeah, funny story. But a lot of those in Korea with Jürgen, looking very, very Korean and not speaking a word of Korean. So that was fun.
Okay, I want to do, towards the end of the interview now, I want to ask some questions which are just like to pick out who sticks out the most in your memory for these certain topics, okay? So this will be a really contentious question right here because of all the players you played with in history. Who do you think was the most skilled CS player you ever played with or saw, during your era? Who do you think had just the maddest skills?
Oof. I always said a player that was very, very skilled was like Dark, another Norwegian player playing for Eolithic. He was extremely skilled player. I mentioned MedioN, HeatoN was very skilled players at that time in his earlier career. He was more known for his skill. But if I would have to pick one, like purely one skilled player, yeah, probably MedioN. Like from what I saw sitting next to the guy playing, it was like, wow, unbelievable. I mean, he was an old Quake player, so the way he could move like nobody else did in Counter-Strike at that time, it was just so much faster than anybody else. So yeah, definitely MedioN.
What about, who do you think through all the teams, who was the best teammate? Who's the guy where he just epitomizes what a teammate should be?
I think, with the players that I played, I played with different types of players. I said Trance is a great team player. I think Notorious was a great team player. Luciano, the guys in Team 9. But XeqtR was kind of the perfect balance with my playing style and how I saw the game to be played. So I think we complemented each other very well of how we played. So he was a very intelligent player that adapted very quickly to any kind of situation. So he brought a lot to the team, to Team 9 when he came over. So I think he made the biggest impact when I have ever recruited a player before. So I would have to say XeqtR in that sense.
Who was the most clutch player?
Ooh, that I played with or played against?
Either. Just who stands out? Is there one guy who just under pressure, he's just money?
I think one of the most clutch players of all time, I think, is Potti. He was just like, he won rounds by himself. He was extremely clutch. I've seen teammates, of course, in my teams doing a lot of clutch things, like Quick did actually a lot of clutch rounds. But and I think that if you see some, I also, as you mentioned, a player before that I think was extremely good, K-Sharp. But from a clutch perspective, if I see what I've seen the most of, I think that Potti was extremely clutch player. He took really important frags on a consistent base.
And then you said before you already picked XeqtR as the most intelligent player, right?
Yep.
Who else who would be like after that? Who else is like super intelligent? Because obviously that's one of the hardest things as an outsider to know, because we don't know what the guys are saying or if they're doing something because someone told them, So who else is up there in terms of like in-game smarts?
I think Elements was a very intelligent player. He was kind of what you calling today the lurking player, but what he really, the kind of timing on his lurking, it was ridiculous. He was just like, whoa, he was there when you really didn't expect him to be there. So he kind of had a neck for being at the right time, at the right place. I loved actually watching him play just because of, he just took also important rounds by himself. So he was very intelligent, but again, I have to go back to that Dark player who I played with. If it wasn't XeqtR, I would say Dark. He also Norwegian. All of them are Norwegian. That's weird, no? He was very intelligent player. He was always smart, super smart guy.
Actually, that reminds me of a weird question I have for you. So not a lot of people know this, but in the early days of CS, in fact, even up to a lot of the latter days of CS, the original CS had very few teams that were multiple nationalities. Like the closest you would come would be like some Norwegians in a team with Swedes, where a lot of Norwegians are going to understand Swedish anyway. So that's kind of cheating in a way, okay? It's not really like having a German guy in a Swedish team, okay? But in modern Counter-Strike now, you get some teams that do that now. Like when it makes sense, you know, like say you can't find a good enough replacement for your team, and so you think, okay, it's not going to be as great speaking in English, but we'll get a better player, and so maybe we can work around it. Now, I know people didn't really do that back in the day, and obviously some of the Swedish teams had like legendary team play, so maybe you needed to have the Swedish language. If people had really tried, if it had been more professional, do you think we could have had teams back in the old Counter-Strike that were like for example, say there was some really godlike, a Brazilian player that you could bring him into like a Swedish team and you could make it work somehow?
If you could do it in the old days, you mean, or now?
In the old days.
In the old, yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, it wasn't you didn't travel as much and you didn't see as much different nationalities on teams. I mean, I think we were actually considering, like, one player that I remember was very, very skilled in a Spanish team called Musambani, if you remember.
Yeah. That was Click Arena was his breakout tournament, mate.
He was extremely good, and we were actually talking about it, like, wow, should we try to recruit this guy? Because we were kind of, I mean, we had Luke with us in Click Arena, even though we won that tournament in the finals against Eolithic. We still felt like we don't have the final component to make this team's 100%, and we were actually considering taking Musambani. So that was one of the players that we were looking at. He was extremely good. So again, it's personality, chemistry, how would it work? But we were, of course, considering it already back then, and it's not by accident that it happens today. You know, you said most skilled players, and I said MedioN before. I have to make a reservation for Spawn as well. That's one of the most skilled players I ever seen play.
Actually, I've got a question for you then. So you said before that, you know, Element almost joined that Team 9 team that was in 2003. Not a lot of people know this, but I remember there was a story where you trialed Spawn or something, right? Didn't you try him earlier in the year around the same time? And then you didn't pick him up, but he later on went to SK. There's something like that, right?
I think we tried even to recruit him, but I think he chose to join SK. Okay. That's why I think it was. That's what I think it was. Because, I mean, Spawn Abdi was a really, really nice, down-to-earth guy. I really liked the guy, always did. And he was extremely skilled. I don't remember, I mean, how I think he was struggling in the beginning when he was coming into the...
He used to choke on lands early on, unfortunately, I think.
Exactly.
He was amazing, obviously.
Yeah, but then he kind of... I think that kind of settled down, if I don't recall incorrectly, that he developed a bit more and more on the lands later. But he was extremely skilled player as well, that I remember.
Okay. So here's what will be a tough question. So you brought this up, though. Since you tried to compare... who was it? You compared Trance to Arl. So if we're going to compare people, was there ever another CS player in any era where they played like vesslan?
Oh, you know, I don't know. I never compared myself a lot with other players. I think maybe a little bit on the AWP side of I can see patterns on how I play. I think that. That's a great question. I think that would be for somebody else to answer. I mean, maybe, I don't know how I remember Vilden was having a little bit of the same philosophy.
Okay.
I still talk to the guy today.
In what sense? Because, I mean, he was more like a stable operator. He wasn't like the super flashy guy who got like the 5 kills and was in the movie.
Same for me, you know. So I was never the flashy kind of player, but being stable is more important, I think, within AWP. And then he always having a more of a philosophical approach to how you structure your team play and so forth. And I think that I remember Quick was talking a lot to eyeballers about how he played and was actually helping them a little bit early. I remember when they were talking with us in ESWC, they were having some troubles at that tournament, and you know, so I think that we played a little bit similar to how they later played, I think, and even NOA also with XeqtR, that whole team played very similar to what we played when I saw them play in World Esports games and stuff like that. So okay. I think that the whole, instead of comparing me as a player to somebody else, I think I more look at how my teams played or compared to other teams.
What do you want to say as a final message for someone who watched this interview? Is there a general message you want to put out there? Is there someone you want to thank at the end of the interview? Now's your time to do so.
Oh no, I think actually somebody that we should say thank you to is you, Duncan. You know, you've been around for a very long time, and it's really been fantastic what you've been doing for the scene. I think your knowledge of this game and the scene has been really deep, and I really appreciate that. So it goes. The shootout is to you, sir.
Okay, right, thanks. Tack så mycket.
You're very welcome.